All right, we're here with Tim York and Aaron Lentz. Tim is the VP of Channel and Partnerships at IC Consult, and Aaron is the VP of Strategy and Advisory at IT Consult. How are you guys?
Good.
Doing great.
Love it. Thanks for taking the time to join. This will be fun because this is a big company that you guys work for, based out of Germany, correct?
Yep.
And you guys do a lot of things. We'll hit on some of those, but we'll also give some stories and examples of what to do, and if you don't do it, there's consequences in this highly digitized world and that we live in. So, Aaron, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Tim for like the bigger picture there. But what is identity and access management?
Sure. So identity and access management is lots of things, but in our industry today, probably in simplest terms, people think about it as having the right people, so your right resources, having the right access to resources at the right time. There's a lot more definitions behind that, but we can talk through that some more. It kind of splits into 3 or 4 different segments. So when we're talking about like enterprises, they have their workforce who needs access to systems. That access is granted through access governance tools. A second set of tools is access management tools, and those are based on authentication. So whenever I have to type in my username and password or do multi-factor authentication to my bank, that's all access management. And then the third tier is privileged access management. That's when I've got highly sensitive or privileged users or bots or service accounts who are doing activities. How do I monitor and manage those systems that otherwise are left unmonitored, unchecked, where their passwords stay the same, so that's privileged access management. That's way more technical than the other two. And then lastly is customer identity and access management. One of our favorite talking points, which I'm sure we'll dive into a lot today.
Yeah. Hit on that if you could, Tim, and then I've got a few questions based on Aaron's answer.
Sure. So CIAM or customer identity access management is my favorite identity tool. And the reason it's my favorite is because the focus is not on control or rules and policies and locking things down and hiding data or controlling that data. It's more about aligning to our customers' goals and what they want to accomplish and how they manage their customer identities. And so it's a different way to look at identity, but it's the fun part because it's about goals and dreams and accomplishing things as opposed to just locking things down and controlling.
Yeah. Give us an example of what that means.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of examples, and we talked about these earlier, are like our applications to our favorite stores, right?
Yep.
My wife has applications to Nordstrom's and Victoria's Secrets and a dozen others. I have a couple of applications that for golf companies. And so my profile or another one I have access to or I have applications to is Target. That's one that I use quite a bit. And so an example of that is I log into the app, I buy things online. Sometimes I show up to the front and they deliver it to my car. Sometimes I walk in and grab it. Sometimes they deliver it to my home. But Target knows how I like to buy and when I like to buy things, and they make recommendations. They offer discounts, they offer deals, they offer promotions, things like that. And so the benefit to me is it eases the way that I acquire products and purchase things. Sometimes they make recommendations for products that I want and need. Sometimes they don't. But the benefit for them is they get to sell more products to me as the consumer. Yeah. They get to sell products and put products in front of me that they know that I like and enjoy. And it's just a better way to as a customer, it's a better way to consume. And as a vendor, it's a better way to sell because I'm locked in on the application. I like the way that I purchase. And so that's the highest level example of, hey, how do we make it easier for your customers to consume, and how do we make that experience better?
Yeah.
And as you know, sometimes those applications do that, and sometimes they don't. And what we do at IC Consult is make sure that our customers have the CIAM tools that are best and appropriate to meet their goals for their customers. And so, again, that's why it's the funnest part for me is we're aligned to their goals and dreams, and we're selling the future, and we're selling excitement and growth as opposed to locking things down and controlling things.
Yeah. So you obviously are a fan of the Target app, or you wouldn't have brought it up.
I'm a fan. I am.
And you've been in this industry, high technology forever. You know the games they're playing, and you're fine with that because the customer service is better. It makes your life easier. You save time and money. And Target doesn't need to guess on what Tim York is wanting this week type of thing. A little bit of a win-win.
That's true. And I am fine with that with certain things, right? They can understand my favorite types of peanut butter or my, things like that, or make recommendations for foods and things. But there are certain types of data that I would never, ever put into an application or never, ever share.
Yeah.
And especially to a company like Target, right? They have no need to understand my children's names and socials and what they like and their pictures and things like that. And so many times when applications ask you to fill out that information, especially when it's a minor, the huge red flag, right? And why those applications help the customers, in many cases, sometimes they're not helping the customers, or sometimes they're helping the customers, but they're also hurting the customers. And so Target is one that I can control and manage and make sure that, they don't have data that's going to hurt me or my family in the future, but not all applications are built the same.
Yeah. And there's not a magic elf back there, just like with a fancy algorithm deciding this. Like, this is what you guys do. It takes a lot of work and strategy to implement these types of things.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially because a lot of these Target's not the only one, all of them, all these major enterprises have been generating revenue digitally for 30 years. And to do that, they've built a ton of different applications and systems to do that. So when we come in, it's not just a button. It's not one piece of software. What we're doing is mapping to how an entire business works and how they generate that revenue, how they sell their customers, those trends. It's across tons of applications. And so it becomes very complex.
Yeah. There's all these names like Oracle and Intel and CDW, you guys, and, your commercials show up in golf tournaments often. And they're talking to people that have to worry about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your clients, like, let's say Mercedes-Benz, in the early days, they were around before digital. Everyone had access to everything, right? But at a certain point, maybe it's employee 30, it's like, oh, they don't need to know this.
Mm-hmm.
But now, however many employees Mercedes-Benz has, not everyone needs to know what R&D is happening and what the vehicle in 3 years looks like and what the composites are made of. That kind of goes back into identity and access management, right?
Yeah. So we've got the first piece, and I talked about this earlier, right people, right access, right time. Anymore, it's right things. So we can talk about like Mercedes-Benz and a lot of the German car industries we've worked with on the right things inside of cars even. So like your identity of things would be like the car, your CarPlay. But even inside the enterprise, like we're talking about with like the R&D, we talk a lot about risk tolerance. So what happens if we lose X? So a lot of cases we're happy for sellers to sell more stuff, even if it's not exactly accurate, right? So we don't want to stop sellers. But with IP, like R&D, we want it to be highly protected. Yeah. Both in who has access, the conduits in which that data is transmitted within, protecting those conduits as well. So it's not just hey, can I get into the system? It's like when this information is transmitted to other places, how am I protecting that? And so that a lot of what we do is granting the appropriate access. That's the access governance we talked about earlier. But then also when you are accessing something, how do I know that you are who you say you are?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is the access management side. And that is when I authenticate, I could go buy so many passwords online.
Right.
If I go on the dark web, I can go figure it out. Some people reuse their passwords. And so passwords and the credentials, username passwords are not entirely dead. I think they're very helpful in a lot of ways, but we talk about multi-factor authentication, which is another way to verify either through a device. There's things like if I'm really sensitive R&D, something that's going to come out that's supposed to be a game changer for like Mercedes-Benz in this case, maybe the only way I can do this is through like I've got to do additional verification, or even where I've got to go in through a privileged account system where I have to actually get a manager approval or a C-suite approval to do things.
Yeah.
And so we add a lot of that extra context into the authentication mechanisms to ensure people should have that access.
Yeah. Because there's soft targets and then there's, hard targets. And, the farmer's market is not anything anyone would go after, right? But a financial institution or a trading desk or big business, big enterprises where there is lucrative things and or ransom or things like that. If you're a soft target and you are in those industries, you're in a bad spot, right?
Yeah. Well, in the soft targets, anymore are also threatened because, like I said a second ago, people reuse passwords, you reuse credentials. And so they'll use these easier, lower risk tolerance kind of companies to get or social engineer others so that they can get into the harder targets, right? Where there is something more worthy of stealing. Or a lot of hackers, man, they're just grabbing what they can, getting mass amounts of data, and then just selling on the dark web, and somebody else is then purchasing that and reusing it. And it becomes like a hacking as a service. We a lot of companies need protection no matter where they fit into it. It's just what is that risk tolerance ultimately needs to be.
Yeah. Because when people come to you, I guess I'll ask this to you, Tim, it's either proactive or reactive, right? Like something bad has happened, or they looked over and like, ooh, look what happened to those guys. Let's make sure that doesn't happen to us.
Yeah, 100%. So it's interesting the way, if you were to follow our business and you could see little ebbs and flows, if there's a public breach or a massive breach that's in the news, the customer interest goes up massively.
Yeah.
And so while breaches are bad, they help drive business for us. So that's one thing. Like you said, a major breach will happen. Then you get other companies that are like, oh, I should probably prepare in case this happens to me. Sometimes the customer that was breached also comes to us.
Yeah.
And they say, hey, we were breached 30 days ago. Here's what they attacked. Here's the data they stole. How would you solve that? And so that's part of our services going into our customers that were breached, and we stop the flood, and then we fix the dam so that it doesn't break again.
Yeah. And this has been happening since the dawn of man, right? Like there's good guys, bad guys. Everyone's trying to be sneaky, and you got to put all these defenses and counter espionage and all of this. It makes for fun stories, but it's not fun if you're experiencing it. But a lot of the times, just going off of headlines or reading interesting stories, if you're running a casino and you're big on customer service, but there's also a ton of data, highly secure, and your business is making money. If you get breached, oftentimes it's not like the cliche hacker in Slovenia doing it. It's kind of more pedestrian, but it seems to be working. Can you guys talk a little bit about what the current atmosphere is on these breaches?
Sure. So a lot of it is when people get breached, like I kind of mentioned, it's like hacking as a service. Like your grandma could go on and, you've got to do some steps, right? But you just buy software that does the hacking for you. And so isn't it necessarily somebody who's just brilliantly technical? It is just building out some ransomware through it. And my argument a lot of times is like, what am I trying to protect? Outages for companies and IP are the two biggest ones to me. There's data. So the data is largely driven through government regulations and costs of fines for audits. So if I'm missing something, like it's a cost to the business, so I don't want to pay that cost. It's things like cybersecurity insurance. So I have to pay those fines. I have to tell the insurance company I'm doing XYZ first. And so most of the cost though, is I have to say, like most companies have all been breached, right? Like most people have experienced it at some different levels. But it's what is it that's getting breached and how are they reacting after. The outages are what you have to prevent for them. So if I can't sell there's some smaller companies that if they go down for 2 days, they're dead. Yeah. They're going bankrupt. There's things like the casino, they lose hundreds of millions of dollars. There are companies, I wouldn't say maybe that, but there are companies who, when a CIO gets put in the spot, right, and asked, or like, hey, you have to pay a ransom. And Tim and I talk about this a lot. Like, what do you do when you're in those shoes? Yeah. And I try to put myself there. And what you have to ask yourself is not just today that I'm dealing with. It's not just my job. If I spend $100 million or whatever in a ransom or $10 million, that cost has to come from somewhere. So I'm often also in that position, in a C-suite position, also deciding, what am I doing as a business? Do I now have to lay off people in my company to make up these costs? Yeah. All because somebody was able to call help desk and hack Bob Joe's account, get something that's maybe minor access in their environment, and then traverse the system with that and ultimately gain more and more privileged access and do more activities. And it's something so simple. It's just some small hole in a dam that allowed them to go to the other side. And it turns into this thing that impacts hundreds of lives, thousands of lives because of a breach. Not just the consumers, right? But all the people who work for that company who've dedicated time for something so simple. That's pretty rough.
Yeah. And that's kind of social engineering type of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting on your point that you made, Aaron, these CISOs have this great sense of responsibility for the organization. They also are now personally responsible. And that takes things to the very next level because, if a company gets breached and the CISO could have prevented that, they could be held liable. There's CISOs that are now in prison because they didn't put the right protocols into place to protect the organization. And so we're seeing a trend in the market with security professionals and CISOs and even IT professionals that are scared to death and they won't get on videos because they're scared of deepfakes. They won't let us record their voices on, team calls and things because they're scared of deepfakes. And then when they get into the meetings, they make these recommendations and then they put all types of terms on their recommendations to say, I'm not liable for anything that happens negatively to this organization because I made this recommendation and you chose not to do it. And so we're seeing that trend. And it's fear-based, but it's real because we're now holding these organizations and these leaders responsible.
Yeah. And that's not a fun place to be. Not a fun place to be where it's like, all I want to do is do my job. Prefer not to go into jail for this, but the stakes are pretty high in a lot of these situations. When you're interacting with customers in your respective roles, what is the best bedside manner to assure them hey, we're squared away. We know what we're doing. Is it the legacy? Is it the cutting edge technology? Is it case studies? How do you guys ultimately gain the confidence?
I'll start that. We work with a lot of nerds, people who just geek out on tech, who love it. And I think a lot of modern CISOs no longer do that. And what they really focus is on the business. And that's a lot of things I coach from an advisory and strategy perspective is what are we doing that provides value back to the business, back to the risk tolerance? I said, when are we doing too much for no reason? So understanding how an enterprise actually operates, which could, most enterprises are revenue generating. There's some that are charity based or whatever, but they're all being driven by something. How does identity support those drivers? So we map to that. And giving what that does is it gives permissions to our audience at these clients to focus on the right things, not just all of the noise, because there's so much tech out there, and there's a lot of really great tech to be clear. But they all do lots of individual feature sets that you need, and they all have to go together, and it becomes a lot of noise because we do all these cool things, but what we're not doing is associating back to the business drivers and the risk tolerance for your business. And so we talk through it, a lot of empathy in the conversations, lots of human interaction where we're saying, okay, what are the issues you've got? What drives you personally, both in your business and what gets you excited about work? How do we drive against that? And then what does your culture of your enterprise look like too? So are you constantly fighting with human resources, or are you fighting for budget all the time from your CFO? What is it? What are your common hurdles? And so we spend a lot of time of okay, let me help you by getting you over those hurdles so that whatever those hurdles are gets us to providing value against the business drivers. It's a big part of what we do. Gotcha.
Anything to add there, Tim?
Yeah, I was going to say another benefit to exactly what Aaron was saying with IC Consult specifically, right? So we're headquartered in Germany. We've got a large operation here in North America, greatly different regions, and there's different data privacy laws in each of these regions. In fact, California has different privacy laws than Utah, right? And obviously we have different than Asia or Europe. And so because we're global, we're all over the world, we comply to those regulations within markets and regions. And so one of the huge benefits for our customers, right, is the way that we process, store, and manage data for them in the States is different than Germany or Europe or anywhere in the world. And most of our customers are now global, right? Or they have employees that are global, or they have customers that are global. Very few organizations are in one region nowadays. And so there's a huge benefit for us is because we take that same approach that Aaron was talking about, very, very specific to that person, but also specific to the region and the regulations that they're held accountable to.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there's a GDPR. And there's probably all sorts of ones that you guys are familiar with that I don't ever want to know about. But you guys gotta know what's legal and not legal. And, you jump across the border 1 foot, it changes your guys' business. How do you guys stay ahead or be in the know of what those regulations are? Because it's like tons.
Yeah, what's interesting is most of the regulations are behind on what I'd say is identity leading practices. I struggle to think about best practices. I think there's certainly from a software perspective, like there's best practices you got to do to deploy a tool. But like I was saying earlier, like everything's based on a company's their drivers and their culture, and so you've got to match identity leading practices against that. And if you're generally feeding into existing leading practices, you're also hitting all the regulations across the board. Because as an example, like HIPAA, for example, requires like you to have a PAM tool, but it doesn't say what is it that I'm having to, which privileged access or privileged accounts that are out there do I need to secure. It's just saying you have to have a PAM tool. It's a lot of things for cyber insurance as well. And so what do I want to do instead is like, if I can get people to follow the right practices, almost all the time it fits the needs of the business. Now I will ask a lot of times there are certainly some regulations that are somewhat antiquated. Without getting too much in details, I'm sure a lot of the audience here has, as like people leaders have probably ran into having to do these access reviews where I've got people on my team and I've got to verify what their access is by checking a box. But man, I don't know what the heck half these accesses are. If I'm in a big company, I may have 100 people reporting to me. I don't know everybody's names. I don't know what they do each day. So what I don't want to do is say no and have their access revoked, and then they can't do their jobs because, again, I'm trying to generate revenue or support the business. And so there are still some of our leading practices in an industry that are antiquated by like doing those access reviews that actually kind of hurt us, but they are part of a regulation to have to do it. So there's a lot of movement, but overall, the short story is if you're hitting standard identity leading practices, which we help coach people on, we've got a whole capability matrix that defines that. You're also hitting all the regulations.
Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting. It's a chicken egg scenario happening here because you brought up HIPAA, Aaron. Perfect example, right? Highly, highly regulated healthcare information was the number 2 targeted breach that exists. It used to be number 1. Now it's financial services, right? And so why HIPAA? Why financial services? It's because that data is the most valuable. Like the more personal and the more intimate the data is about that person, there's more value to it. And so because those are the most regulated industries and we're following all the regulations globally, like Aaron said, as long as we meet those customer demands and understand what they're doing for the best practices, they're going to be compliant with those regulations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a lot of chainsaws up in the air to juggle.
Yeah.
But at some point, you got to factor in common sense. But in a big bureaucratic company, you've got thousands of employees and they all have their own lives and struggles. And some of them might change their affiliations or their allegiances, things like that. Are there companies out there that you guys just know have the best practices, like from operational security, common sense, or that matrix? Like, this is a good best practice company.
Yeah, I would not say anybody's hit 100%.
Okay.
And the reason for that is what we're trying to protect is vast. So those who may be familiar here, like we've got this concept of zero trust, and basically it's just saying like we've got not everything's on network, on-prem anymore. So how are we essentially supposed to trust anybody from any any channel that's coming into our enterprise? And the short of it, without getting into it, is like we just don't trust anything.
Right.
But back before, it was just like, oh, these people are on my networks. That's good enough, right? Like, and so now we've got to be able to build a lot more trust around other things.
Yeah. Because once the fox is in the hen house,
exactly. So people talked about protecting the network perimeter for a long time, and now there's just no perimeter. And so what we do instead is say there are all of these applications out there. Because there are so many, like I can't monitor all of them.
Yeah.
And so what we do, my short little analogy on this is if I think about like an oil pipeline, this conduit that's holding the oil is protecting that oil. But anywhere along the line, somebody can come up and hit it with an axe and start taking the oil out of it. But what these oil companies do is it's pressurized or sensors on it. It stops the flow. So you can only take so much oil. But also those sensors show where it got broke. And so now I have a crew going to go fix it. I'm going to see the people with truckload of oil coming out. Yeah. And so that's what we got to do is the conduit is not just one conduit. It's thousands of conduits and different types of conduits through that we're working within. So how do I detect identity threat and basically cut off the conduit, send a swarm of people to go in and look and make sure none of my communication packages were stolen, and be able to grab those. And whenever they are essentially stolen, how do I prevent them from being read through like encryption and stuff? And that's probably a whole nother deeper technical stuff we can talk through, like quantum computing. But it's going to be a pretty exciting future for all that.
Yeah, it's never going to stop, is it? When is a good time for companies to ultimately, I guess, engage with y'all or start thinking about what we've talked about so far in this podcast?
Yeah, 30 years ago.
Today.
Today. So it can't be 30 years ago today. And that's just because there's so much new stuff and there's so much to do. We have to help people figure out what it is that needs to be focused on first. How do we overcome the hurdles? How do we overcome the hurdles for them to get there? Just a quick little story I ran into once. I had a client, Fortune 5, probably Fortune 300 company, who was trying to do this privileged access management tool. They spent $1 million on the tool and services to get it deployed. It wasn't us who deployed it. We came in because they couldn't get it turned on. And here's why. Their CISO looked at me and like brought me in the room, and we like just had a heart to heart about it. It's like, I was supposed to go live on a Friday with this. We told all of these administrators about it on a Thursday, and within the 24 hours, I got a petition of 250 people who said they were going to quit this weekend if I went live with this tool. And that's because what he wasn't doing is this unintentionally, wasn't just looking and understanding the culture of the company and what it was going to mean to them, because it was in fact going to make their jobs harder. Yeah. But what that meant is it took them a year. So they lost $1 million on that. They also had to pay fines for not meeting regulations, all because they weren't thinking about the culture. Oh. And so bringing us in today helps us understand and define whatever we're going to have to do from a change management perspective, back to the drivers, what's worth doing. Because I'd also say there was a lot of these users that didn't need to have this amount of work put onto them. We can help them do the right thing so they're not wasting spend, because that money's hard to get for security.
Oh, yeah. What about like company size or revenue, right? Like at a certain point, if a company grows and scales, they need to start having these conversations. Whereas 3 years ago, they were eating ramen noodles and talking about meeting payroll. But yeah, is there a certain time in revenue or numbers of people that they engage with y'all?
Yeah, I'm going to keep stealing all the thunder here. Sorry, Tim. But all sizes. And it's so hard because they only make so much money, right? Now, and we're a for-profit company, right? So we have our own targets to hit. But, man, we talk to anybody, no matter the size, just to help give them the right direction. They may not be able to afford a whole big services practice and like product and everything. But, like, some products they get in suites. It's just how they manage that data. It's a thought process. It's how do we think about identity? And you can build in some controls. And then when you get to certain sizes, and I really should say certain complexities, then you start adopting tools to help support that complexity. And what we do a lot of times is how do we coach a client? I mean, I get into like the sales processes and stuff that have nothing to do with identity to help simplify a company's business processes so that identity can become way less expensive for the enterprise to help manage and maintain long term. And so by bringing us in to do some of that, it just helps a lot. Yeah. And so last little piece there. So you could be a 50-person company and you still need identity access management, or 100,000 person. It's really about how complex are your use cases. And what we want to do is help you make those use cases as least complex as possible. Interesting.
Obviously, we're in 2024 and be remiss if we didn't talk about AI, right? Apparently, it hasn't happened to me yet, but you can fake people out quite easily these days. You could have somebody that and somehow their voice is recorded and they call and say, meet me outside in 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So a common trend that's happening is parents that are putting their pictures and videos of their children online, and hackers, or we'll call them the bad guys, are taking that information. They're taking the pictures, the videos, and they're deep faking those children's voices. And they're literally calling the parents, and it sounds like it's your kid. And the kid's crying and they're saying, Mom, I've been kidnapped. These guys are asking for money. Send them the money. Right. And there was just a case in October. A woman, her teenage daughter was in tears crying, and she thought that, it was real. And so she paid the ransom. Right. And so that is becoming more and more common. They can age your children. I mean, they can take pictures and age. They can adjust what their voices are going to look like in the future. And they can do it to us as adults too. Right.
Sure.
But that's one of the common things that we're seeing. The other common thing that we're seeing from a deep fake is the videos, right? In France, there was a CEO that was deep faked on a Zoom call. Mm-hmm. And his team, I can't remember the exact number, but it was 20 million. It was a big number. It was millions of dollars. And they had to transfer. And literally the person that worked for the CEO is seeing a video of a deep fake, and he thought it was his CEO. It was his voice. It was his tone. It was his inflection. It was his micro expressions. I mean, it was exact, right? And so deepfakes are getting so good. How do you know the video you're talking to is actually your child? How do you know it's actually your leader? How do you know it's that person? Yeah. And so it's getting kind of scary how good the bad guys are getting at doing these things. But, just as the bad guys are getting better, we're also getting better.
Yeah. Better you guys than me on that one, right? Like, you got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, well, and some of the solutions are relatively simple. It's all about identity verification. So how do I verify the person is on the other side? Fortunately for that scenario, they had some back-end processes that required further approvals before you could just send a $20 million transfer. And so that was able to stop it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some family members that I have, we essentially have code words. We talk about like passwords aren't the greatest thing anymore, but just having some amount of code conversation when I see this, okay, well, like my AI is not going to be able to like figure out what my code word that I talked about in private with somebody is. And so there are some simple things that go back to the dawn of time. Like it's just the ways we've always done things.
Yeah.
It's just digital now.
Yeah. Quite a world. There's 3 other agencies that are really good at this. And if you're trying to get the reward for a bad guy, they really validate who you are first, right? Because it's really easy to fake it. Like, hey, he actually lives in the duplex next to me. And it's just some person that he doesn't like, and door gets kicked in, and oh, there you go.
Now you've traumatized somebody, and you have to pay to repair the door.
Yeah. Really interesting what you guys do. For folks and companies that are interested in having further conversations, what would be the best way to get in contact with y'all?
Yeah, so we're going to post this on social media. Mm-hmm. We'll have links to Aaron's contact and my contact, iconsult.com. We've got a great website. You can log in and make a request to talk to a rep. And again, we are global. We're in 18 countries. Assuming most of our audience is North America, we've got reps and teams spread across the country. So, reach out to me personally. Reach out to our website. We'll have links.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about this stuff, so we can just talk for fun too.
Yeah. You guys clearly enjoy it, and you've both been at it a really long time. Last question for sure this time. In your personal lives, or when you're talking to folks at the airport and they want to kind of learn and piggyback on your guys' knowledge, what are some best practices that Joe Public can do to avoid some of these calamities?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So there's lots of like the workforce side. Man, people just don't live that, and their workforce is responsible. For my personal life, the biggest thing is to not reuse passwords across websites. Use very complex passwords when you do have to use a password. Tim talked about earlier about what is it that you store. Ask yourself, do they really need this? If I have to there's little things like if I have to do an I-9, my social security number's got to go on it. I'm not mailing that in. I'm not faxing it. I'm not doing anything. I will be on the phone with the person that I need to give that to. Make sure that they're in a spot where it's not going to get overheard, all that kind of stuff. Or I'll go in person and give it to them.
Yeah.
So think about like how am I back to the conduits, right? How am I protecting the conduits, and do I have control of them? If I'm just putting it into a form so I can get a free dessert at a restaurant, they don't really need all of my information. The next piece, it's really hard. It's really annoying to have to do, but multi-factor authentication. And that is MFA means that I have 2 forms of verifying who I am. All those like pesky text messages you get with the one-time password, it's that.
Yeah.
Now there's tons of different types of them that are a lot easier to do. Or if I can go passwordless on a system. So there's a lot of avenues now where I don't have to type in my password at all. I just have to click a button on my phone through the app or whatever, and that verifies who I am. And the reason why that's important is not everybody has my phone, right?
Yeah.
So there's things I know. There's things I am as a person. And then there's things I have. And so you have to have this to do that. And I said that was the last one. The third one I would do, man, just put some kind of password on your device.
Yeah.
If your device gets taken, it's all gone.
Yeah. Anything else to add there, Tim?
I would just add that it's so basic, but it's good. It's a good reminder. Don't click on links you don't know. Don't scan barcodes you don't trust. Don't post pictures and videos of your children outside of a trusted group. I mean, those are all kind of no-brainer things, but you kind of have to start doing those things in today's day and age.
Yeah, I already helped the Prince of Kenya, so if you asked, just don't worry about it like that. That was me. I already fixed it.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
You got half his fortune.
Yeah, I got half his fortune, so there is no more.
Yeah, good for you. Way to play that one. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tim and Aaron, for joining us. Learned a lot. Appreciate it.
Good
Thank you,
time.
Garrett.
Thanks.
Appreciate you.